score, trying to come in alone. Shoot! Score! He had it good! He had it good, baby! He wins it for the Lightning! 5-4 in overtime!
Taylor the shot, redirected, score! Game 7, Montana St. Louis! We are going back to Tampa Bay! Cavalier spinning. Cavalier looking. Trying to drop it off. Brings it in himself. Left it in the middle. Shot.
Welcome to another episode of Thunderstruck with, of course, your host, Philip Wunderlich, and your co-host, Jake Ricker. Jake, how excited are you that we are officially in playoffs?
I'm very excited. I mean, we still got another month of the regular season that I'm looking forward to, but to get clinched, be clinched and have a playoff spot locked in is also very exciting. And it's nice to know that we don't have to be worrying too much. But we knew that was all going to happen, a long time ago. But it's exciting nonetheless.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you knew that was only just a matter of time. It was kind of interesting to see my Western Conference team kind of making, it happen for the Lightning. Because, I mean, if that Ducks won against the Montreal Canadiens, that's what really clinched them. And, it's like you said, it's always nice to see, our team finally making playoffs that we all knew was going to happen. It was just a matter of when. And it's going to be interesting to see who our next opponent is in the first round there.
Yeah, it will be. We got a couple teams to keep an eye on, including Carolina, Pittsburgh, I believe even Montreal as well. So we'll have to watch that. I think a lot of those teams should be relatively easy for us to beat. But I don't want to say that, though, because it is the playoffs, and the playoffs are an entirely different beast.
Yeah, and speaking of that, Jake, myself, I'd rather face Carolina. Because I think that it would be the easier of the three. Like you said, I don't want to say easy because, I mean, of course, it's the playoffs. You never know what's going to happen. But who would you like to face in the first round there?
It's tough to say because all these teams have a certain aspect of them that could give the Bolts difficulty. When you look at Carolina, yes, they're probably the easiest matchup of the three, but Carolina has this storyline going into the playoffs. They're the underdogs right now. They got the bunch of jerks thing going on right now. This team's having fun, and they would love to make a splash, especially knocking out a team like us in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So, and sometimes that can be a big part of a team's success in the regular season and the postseason. So, that's going to be an interesting aspect for them. As for Pittsburgh's going to be a tough team. They're a very physical team if we end up playing them. So, coming out of the second round, we may face Boston. So, playing a Pittsburgh team that could beat us up a little bit would be pretty tough. And then Columbus, we've probably dominated the most, or we have dominated the most this regular season. So, and they haven't been playing too well as of recent. So, personally, I'd probably say either, Probably more than likely Columbus or even Montreal, one of those two teams. Although Montreal definitely has more of a physical aspect than the other ones.
Yeah. Like I said, too, you don't want to get beaten up in the first round either. As you mentioned, I think the worst team that I'd like to face, though, is Pittsburgh Penguins. I mean, they have multi-cup wins. And, I mean, that team in the playoffs is a whole different breed. I mean, you have this team that's, that does decent in the regular season, but when they get to the playoffs, like I said, they're a whole different breed. You don't know what's going to come out of them.
Yeah, and that goes for everybody. But, I mean, looking at the standings right now, it's either going to be Carolina, Pittsburgh, Columbus, or Montreal. And if I had to rank those, I'd probably put Columbus number 1, Montreal 2, Carolina 3, and then Pittsburgh 4.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I would have it, too. Like I said, I probably would like to pair Carolina rather than the Jackets, but we'll see what happens. I don't want to see any skull claps in Amalie Arena, though. That would not be a good experience.
No.
But going back here, You had an article recently about how great this Lightning team is. It's going on historic runs. Just tonight we got two records broken, but unfortunately we got one taken away with that Stamkos goal being offsides.
Well, he didn't break the record; he tied it.
Or tied it. Apologize. But Nikita Kucherov did get that record for points. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah, points in a season. So it's nice to see that. But what do you kind of break down your article for me, and for the listeners as well?
Well, it's like the article says, this is one of the best teams we have seen, not only in Lightning franchise history, but in the NHL ever. I mean, there's a couple of records that we've broken. For example, we're one of the fastest teams to break 100 points, and I believe it was like 63 games played, which that hadn't been done since the 70s, which is a very, very long time ago. So we haven't seen a team of this caliber put up this many points this quickly for so long, and the records go on and on. I mean, it's not just team records that are being broken. It's, individual player records, like Kucherov, who just broke the points record, surpassing Vinny. He's at 109 now. I actually believe he got another point in that game, so I think he's actually at 110 now, if I'm not mistaken. Vasi and Domingue are battling it out for the most consecutive wins, both at 11, by the way, which is crazy to think that a record like that was almost broken twice in the same year. And then, you got the defensive core who has stepped up, and they as a group had an NHL record, I believe. I don't remember the exact statistic, but it was the first time in a while in the Cap era that four defensemen had all combined for a goal in the same game. So, I mean, there's just record after record that they continuously break and are on pace for the historic season. And I have a really good feeling that they're probably going to break the wins record too, which is just, it's unfathomable.
Yeah, and like you said, we'll kind of hit on each game here and kind of break it down, because like you said about the defensemen coming up big in that one game. So so the first game here that we mentioned on the last podcast was against the Kings, and the following game we played the Rangers. We saw some familiar faces, and the Bolts won their 10th in a row.
Yeah, another big game. A lot of former Rangers players stepping up in that game. I believe McDonough, Girardi both had a goal in that game. I don't remember if a third one got up top. I think Strawman actually had a point in that game as well. So, a ton of Rangers, former Rangers stepping up in that game, and we played a pretty decent game. Rangers were able to come back there and push the game into overtime, but the Bolts got the job done when they needed to.
Yeah, and that tends to be the case most of the season. The Bolts really get the job done when everything's on the line there. And the following game after the Rangers, we played the Boston Bruins, and Boston actually destroyed our record there. It's unfortunate we didn't get their 11th in a row. It's the team you don't want to lose to either.
No, it's not, because it's Boston. It's in your division. A big rival, obviously, but this is not a game that concerns me, and it may sound like bias coming from me, but I mean, this was our third city in like 4 nights, coming off a back-to-back. Domingue was in net, and not to take anything away from Domingue. Domingue's a fantastic goaltender. He played well tonight, which we'll get to in a minute, but with all those things considered, this is a really, really tough game to come into and play really well. Now, this is no excuse. Obviously, you need to play your best in all situations, but it doesn't concern me too much. And for a lot of this game, it was a 1-0 game. So, and even 0-0 for a decent majority as well. So, we didn't play a terrible game. It wasn't like it was 7-0. They scored those goals late into the third period. So, not too big of a concern when I look at this.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, the first goal actually came in the second period, and all their other goals, I mean, we got beat 4-1, and it all came in the third period. Anthony Cirelli did get on the score sheet, making it so that way Hudobin didn't get the shutout there. But was it Hudobin or Halak?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I have to look. Nevertheless, though, I mean, this only evens the series at 1-1 too. We had beaten Boston earlier in the series as well, so it'll be a bigger test once we play Boston again, because I believe we play them still 2 more times coming up in the season. So it'll be interesting to see how those games turn out, and that's the time I think you can start to judge a little bit more. Although, like we mentioned, playoffs are completely different, so almost none of this really matters for the Lightning. This is now just let's get home ice for the entirety of the playoffs.
Right. And speaking of home ice, the following game there we did get the victory, and this is one that you mentioned. The defenseman getting on the score sheet, Victor Hedman having a goal, Ryan McDonough having a goal, Eric Cernak having a goal, and Mikhail Sergachev having a goal as well. And it's nice to see our defensemen chipping in offensively. That's something that you want to see happening in the playoffs as well there. So it's like I said, it's good to see that not only them playing their defensive role but also playing the offense too.
Absolutely. It was Tuukka Rask in net, by the way, for Boston. But yeah, the defensemen have been huge. When they step up and help us out, when offensive players haven't been able to get out on the board because teams are taking time and space away from them, it's a huge help. The only thing that scares me a little bit when you look at these situations is because the D-men, pinch up on the play, it causes a lot of odd man rushes. I don't know the exact statistic or if they track something like this, but I bet you the Bulls are up there when it comes to how many odd man rushes they give up compared to the rest of the league.
Yeah. And then the following game against the Jets is one that kind of scared me. Like I mentioned, Jets have that offensive firepower, but we fired back, and we got another 5 goals in this game. It's kind of nice too, because really the fourth line is what chipped in here. Adam Ernie getting assists. Getting a goal there. Cedric Paquette getting a goal. So it's not only our top 2 lines you got to worry about. It's every single player in the lineup.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was the depth showing up big time there. And yes, the Jets were out with a couple of players like Dustin Byfuglien, but the Bulls played a fantastic game. I was fortunate enough to be at that game, and it definitely showed. They were on the Jets constantly. They had the puck for majority of the game in the offensive zone. So a really, really well played game. Very, very happy with that performance against a top tier team. Even if they are without a couple of players, the Jets are a very good team. Nothing to take away from them.
Yeah, and the Jets are 99% sure going into the playoffs there. So it's winning against a team that who knows you might face in the Stanley Cup final. It's always a good sight. And like you said, you were able to go to that game. How was the arena during that game? Was it pretty rocking or what?
Oh yeah, it was a ton of fun. Everybody was having a good time, especially because we were winning, obviously, and it was a really good game. So it's always a great experience. Obviously, being in Amalie Arena, it's such an amazing arena and so many amazing fans there. So it was a great experience.
Yeah. And then the following game, we got a loss again. Dubnyk played amazing, and we lost 3-0.
Yeah, this was a tough game. Minnesota is not the best of teams, but they're not the worst of teams either. A lot of people are looking at this game saying, well, Minnesota was fighting for a playoff spot, and the Lightning are more than likely. We had a chance to clinch that night, but we're basically not going to miss the playoffs. If we would have missed the playoffs, a meteor would have had to hit the earth for that to happen. But they didn't play their game. So it was a bummer to lose this one, especially getting shut out at home. But, this thing is going to happen. The problem with the Lightning right now is that the bar has been set so high, is that even when we have these bad games, this was arguably one of the worst games the Bolts had, but in months. It's been a long time since we had one of those games. And you could say the Boston game, but even then, these games do not happen often, is my point. So, but the bar has been set so high is that when they do happen, a lot of Bolts fans tend to freak out and go to a panic mode. But I don't think that's the case at all.
No, exactly, and you're exactly right there. I mean, you say that the bar's been set so high. I mean, look how many wins we have. So I mean, the Bolts fans, they think that we're going to win every single game, and I mean that's not going to happen, unfortunately. Um, and Jason Zucker also played a great game in this one. He got all 3 goals for the Wild, and it's like I said. We can't win every game, and yeah, I forgot my train of thought, but yeah,
it's all right. But yeah, no, you can't win every game, so I don't think it's too much to be concerned about. The Lightning, it's not like the Lightning didn't have their chances in this game either. They had a couple of decent chances to capitalize on, and they didn't. So, but when you have these kind of games, you got to move on to the next one. As we know, the Lightning have only lost 2 games in a row. I think 2 or 3 times this season, which is remarkable. And we showed it tonight. We bounced back once again.
Yeah, and like I said, we did bounce back tonight. We played the Detroit Red Wings. And like I said, Kucherov set the Lightning record in the win. He did get the most points in his season. He beat Benny Cavalier, one of my favorite Bolts. And, he's really an elite player. I mean, you talk about an argument for the Hart. I mean, he should be a shoo-in, right?
I mean, I don't know if I would say a shoo-in because, I think there is a argument to how many great players that Kucherov is surrounded by, but he should absolutely be in that conversation and be up there for sure. I mean, he's got 110 points. He's dominating the league. It's just not even close. I mean, Kucherov is playing at such a high level. He's continuously proved every single year. He's having one of his best seasons. So, yes, he should absolutely be highly considered for the Hart.
Yeah. And another thing that I want to kind of talk about in this game, Jan Rutta got recalled, and he played in his first game as a Bolt. I unfortunately was not able to watch this game, but how do you think he did?
He did all right. He didn't have a huge presence in the game just because, he's playing in the bottom pair, obviously, so he didn't have too much ice time. So, it's hard to gauge a player when they play in their first game like this. So, he didn't make any huge mistakes. He didn't make any huge plays either. So, he'll more than likely be out soon, though, once one of these defensemen comes back and is healthy and ready to go again. So, but he did all right. It'll be interesting to see once he finishes out the year in the AHL and how he's able to develop over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, and even he is a third pairing defenseman. I mean, as long as he doesn't make mistakes, I mean, he's a decent player for us. And then I kind of want to look to kind of going back here. And speaking of Nikita Kucherov, he was actually the star of the month for February. He had 8 goals and 17 assists in 15 games. That's well over a point a game, nearly almost 2 points a game. And like I said, he's been incredible this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, going back to when you were talking about the Hart Trophy, he should absolutely be the Hart winner because the Hart, if I'm not mistaken, is for the player with the most points. And I was thinking more of the Ted Lindsay Award, which is the MVP. So flip-flop my awards there. But yeah, Kucherov.
You got it actually.
Oh, I did?
The Hart is for MVP.
Okay, yeah. So I stand corrected. My bad. But I saw someone on Twitter at one point say that Kucherov is only performing against, worse teams, and he doesn't have a lot of points against some of the top tier teams. But to me, this is just stupid. It's silly. Because if you look at it against teams like Calgary, who is still, I think they're the 3rd best team in the league now. They dropped below the Boston Bruins, surpassed them, but he is dominated against teams like that. Against Winnipeg, he's played pretty decently too. I mean, and he's just breaking so many records. He's on pace to become one of the best Russian-born players on the left wing, which is just outstanding and so surreal. So he's been absolutely amazing.
Absolutely. And, one of our other writers as well just wrote an article, and he's basically saying that, like you said earlier, that we had a great season, but we have a lot of unfinished business since last year. And what do you think that we will have any real challenges in the playoffs? And since we're so much so much better built this year compared to last year?
I mean, we'll absolutely have challenges. There's no doubt in my mind. Sure, we're a better team, but just because you're a better team doesn't mean that it's going to be easier for you. I think there's some teams that we could probably get by pretty easily, sure, but teams like Boston and Winnipeg and even Calgary are going to give us a tough time, and it's going to be hard. We have to be able to play our game. There's a couple things that we've struggled with, like when teams do a really good job of taking away our time and space, it makes it a lot more difficult on us. We're also the second most penalized team in the NHL right now, so we've been giving teams a lot of opportunities to come back in these games or get early goals and get up on us. Luckily, we have the best penalty kill in the National Hockey League, so it hasn't been too much of a problem, but there's definitely some things that could give us some trouble come playoff time.
Yeah. And like I said, we do have the best penalty kill, and I believe we're still third for power plays, and we've been in that spot all season, and that's not a bad spot to be in.
We have the best ranked power play at 28.6%. The next closest is actually a couple percent below us. If my website will load here, I can tell you who it is. The average, by the way, though, in the league is 19.8.
Wow.
Second's Boston at 26.8.
Yeah. And, that's likely a second round matchup as well. If Boston wins their first round, and, it's always going to be a challenging matchup against them. But considering our power play and our penalty kill numbers, I mean, that's really what you got to rely on in the playoffs because, so many penalties are taken.
Yeah, that's definitely something you got to make sure is good. Luckily, we also have Vasi behind us and Domingue as well, so it makes our PK even better. So we gotta just keep up. We gotta play our game. If we play our game, I think we're gonna be all right, and I think we can make it to the finals very easily. But
yeah, and another thing too is like you said, you got to play our game, but not only play our game, but we got to play a full 60 minutes. I mean, there's been several times throughout the year that we kind of sat on the lead, and if you do that in the playoffs, they're going to destroy you. And so, that's another thing you got to watch out for, and that's my only drawback.
Well, it's funny you say sit on the lead. I think actually sometimes, because like I mentioned earlier, our defensemen who play up on the play, when we do have the lead, it actually comes back to bite us because then they end up with odd man rushes and they end up, getting closer and closer to tying the game or potentially tying the game. So I don't think they sit on the lead too much, but you're right, though, and definitely the sense is you really need to keep up the aggression and play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah. And then, so next thing I want to kind of do here is talk about the upcoming matchups. I wanted to try to do a podcast next week as well, like we have been doing. So the first matchup here is going to be against Toronto. Toronto is most likely going to be a playoff team, so it's going to be a difficult matchup, especially considering, the Leafs is a great team.
Yeah, this will be a big game. It'll be nice to have Vasi rested and ready to go for this game, though. I think that's why Domingue ended up playing tonight, because they're looking to put Vasi in net against Toronto. So that's a big game. The Bolts have had relatively good success against Toronto this year. Toronto has got their weaknesses, and the Lightning can definitely take advantage of that if they play their game.
Yep. And then the following game is against Detroit. Like I said, we just beat Detroit tonight with a score of 3-2. So hopefully we'll have a similar record against them in that game. And, maybe Domingue will play there too. We kind of got to get Vasi rested. And if we continue having Vasi rested for the playoffs, then he'll perform better.
Definitely a possibility. I could see them wanting to use Vasi against Washington. However, though, I don't know if I could see Vasi playing one game, sitting one game, playing one game. That's not normal for him, but we'll see what happens. There's also a 2-day rest period in between the Toronto and Detroit game, so a little bit of an extended rest period there. So maybe Domingue, I don't know. I feel like Vasi will probably can get a little bit of streak. Domingue will probably play against Arizona next week, but that's a little bit ahead. But either way, this should be a relatively physical matchup too, so we need to make sure our physicality is ready to go. Like tonight, these things got a little chippy out there.
Yeah, and like you said too, it is going to be a 2-game break, but it's kind of like football, right? so once your team clinches the playoffs, do you really want to play your first string quarterback or so? Because I mean, you always risk that chance of having an injury, or do you go with the second string guy? And I mean, I don't want to say not care about him, but at the same time, he's not your starter. So if something does happen, then you don't have to worry about injury.
Yes, but keep in mind, we only clinched the playoffs, which is huge. Obviously, don't get me wrong. But the Lightning, I think, are still looking to clinch the division, clinch the conference, or well, not conference, clinch the league even. So, they could like I said, have a chance to set the record for most wins ever in NHL history. So I think that's something they might be excited about and might be wanting to potentially do here. So, they're not done yet by any means. So, once you get to that point, though, of them clinching all that stuff, then you can talk about that. But I think as of right now, they're looking for home ice.
Yeah. I mean, so what you're saying is you wouldn't rest Vazzy as much considering that you want to go for those records. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I don't know. The main thing right now for me is injuries. I mean, if we lose our top players, then we're nothing.
Well, it's not so much the records to say, but even just home ice. I think home ice is actually super important, especially come playoff time. It'd be really nice to have Game 7s in Tampa versus wherever. In Boston, it'd be a tough place to play. So, I think you want to play for home ice for sure. So, yes, if we lose a couple of players, it's going to hurt us. But I mean, we've seen Tampa be without a couple of guys, they haven't had too many times where we've had multiple big names out, but when Vasi went down, or when Hedman went down, or when Strawman went down, the Lightning, picked it up, and they still played relatively well. So it's not too much of a concern for me. Again, don't get me wrong, I want Vasi in net during the playoffs, but I think they go for home ice.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. I just kind of want to play devil's advocate and see on kind of both sides of the story here. But like I said, against Washington, we will likely see Vazzy and net coming back home in Emily for a 2-game homestand. We won't talk too much about Arizona because we will likely have a podcast before that. So yeah, but like you said, we gotta play our starters here and there, and we'll likely see him against Washington.
Yes, Washington will be a fun game too because we have not played the Capitals this season yet. It's actually the first time we're going to be playing them, which is crazy to say as we've come down to the wire here. We play Washington once per week here. We play them the 16th, the 20th, and then the 30th. So it'll be interesting to see how the Bolts fare against the Capitals. Last time we saw them, obviously we know it was in the conference finals at the Stanley Cup playoffs when we lost them in Game 7. So it'll be interesting to see how the Bolts play. Maybe they'll play with a little bit of finder under their feet and play a good game. I hope so. The defense is the penalty kill is going to have to be aware of Ovechkin. He's so good on the power play. So hopefully they can make sure they got a guy keep an eye on him at all times.
Yep. And that's another person that, they might consider for the Hart as well. I mean, Ovi really has carried the Capitals most of the season, and he's been playing really well for them. And it's going to be a difficult matchup. I mean, anytime you go against Washington, it's always a physical performance. You got guys like Tom Wilson and TJ Oshie who always kind of play with the grit to their game. And, Ovi is no pushover either. So it's going to be a great game. Hopefully we'll both be watching that one. And, yeah.
The Capitals, it'll be interesting to see how they're playing once we get to them because they've had a little bit of a streaky season, I want to say. They've had a couple points where they haven't been playing so good, and I think they had a 10-game losing streak at one point or something like that. They had a really long losing streak for a little bit there, so it'll be interesting to see if that continues and if that will take an effect when we run into them. It'll be interesting to see. So, but a good game nonetheless for sure.
Yeah, and they are first on the Metro now. New York Islanders have been on there for a long time, but it's definitely, like you said, a streaky team. Uh, Next thing we kind of want to talk about is something that we talked about before the show. Is about Ryan Callahan. Ryan Callahan has not played in many games, and a little bit ago, as we mentioned before, John Cooper kind of said, "Hey, you're the 13th guy." So what do you think happens to Ryan Callahan after this season?
Personally, I think it depends on how we end up doing in the playoffs. If theoretically, let's say we win the cup this year, we have one of the best seasons in NHL history. I think a guy like Ryan Callahan retires. He's got 1 year left on his contract after this. He gets like 4.7 million, I believe, in cash. And when you're getting that old and you're told that you're the 13th forward, you're not going to get that much more playing time. Why not go out on top? Why not go out with the cup, being one of the best teams in NHL history? I think you're crazy to keep going like that, especially with 1 year left. I mean, yeah, you could go back for back-to-back, but, a lot of guys like to retire when they're on top. So I don't think it's a crazy thing to say that he would retire considering we win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, and that's a possibility, but I kind of think that he'll continue and just play out that one last year. Who doesn't want to get over $4 million and sit in a box watching your team play? I mean, yeah, it sucks because as much as he's a gamer and he loves his team and he loves to play, but I mean, that's a lot of money for, pardon my French, but just sitting on your butt.
I mean, yes, it is a lot of money, but consider though too, he's been getting paid a lot of money for a long time. This is not his first couple of years in the league. So, a guy like him, I'm sure he's not worried about money. I'm sure he's more thinking about, his health, how he's doing, his family situation. I don't know all these things. He could very well want to play another year and not care about any of that. But when I look at it, I think it's a reasonable thing to consider to retire after that. I mean, 4.7 million to you and me is a ton of money, but to him, it's not that much in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. But at the same time, you said that he might retire. But do you think that if another scenario, do you think that if he doesn't retire, we buy him out, even though he's a well-liked player?
Yes, that's absolutely a strong possibility. For our management team, when you look at a guy like Ryan Callahan, sure, he's beloved, but he's costing us 4.7 million with a lot of guys that we got to come up and re-sign, like Point and all the guys we got coming up in the system. There's just not that much of a use for him. I hate to say it like that, but that's the honest to God truth. So yeah, I think it's definitely a strong possibility. With only 1 year left on his contract, a buyout wouldn't be too terrible for him. So, or for us to say. So, I think we could do that, and we probably will, more than likely, if he doesn't retire. But Ryan Callahan also might not want to be bought out, so that's something else you could think about too. He might be considering. He wants to go out on his own terms as well. So
yeah, and like you said too, I mean, of course you can say that he wants to go out on his own terms, but I mean, a buyout is more of a management based and owner based. So I mean, it's really like a firing. I mean, if you're buying someone out, like we bought out Carl back in the a few years back there, he's basically saying, you know what, we don't want you to play for us anymore. We need the money, and this is what we're going to do to you.
I mean, we bought out Vinny, though. I wouldn't consider Vinny a firing.
No, I mean, yeah, we bought out Vinny, but I mean, we needed that cap space too. All right. So like you said, right now, I mean, we have these upcoming contracts like Braden Point. I mean, Vazzy needs a new contract pretty soon, so we need that kind of money, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the off season. Hopefully, we go out strong, but like I said, it's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, it will be for sure.
One more thing here, going back a little bit. I know it kind of bounced around, but one last thing is we signed this player named Jimmy Huntington. And he's from the Q. He played for the Oceanic. The Oceanic is actually where Sidney Crosby came from. Obviously we're not expecting a Sidney Crosby type player, but if he's anything like Pierre Boulay, then we got a good player on our hands. Looking at Biarbule's stats, he's fourth in goals, correct, and 10th in points. So I mean, if you have someone like that, he's going to be a very valuable player. Maybe not in the NHL level right away, but definitely in the AHL when we can use some guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime the Lightning make a signing like this, you get excited because they've done so well at signing undrafted free agents. Tyler Johnson is, a prime example. So it'll be interesting to see how he does. Hopefully he does well, obviously. But yeah, Biarbule, I'm super, super excited about. He's playing really well. Been playing really well as of late as well. Like you mentioned, he's up there in points and goals. So he's going to be a fun guy to watch next year when he gets up here into the NHL. And I'm sure he'll be one of the guys that gets called up after the AHL playoffs are over, obviously, because teams can start calling up a lot more without having to worry about waivers, considering injuries, obviously. But, a guy I want to talk about, too, that, has kind of flown under the radar to me is Carter, how do we pronounce his last name? Verhaeghe, you said?
Verhaeghe,
yes, Carter Verhaeghe. He is killing it down in the AHL right now. He's currently second in points. I believe he's top 5 in assists. Give me 1 second as it loads. He is fourth in assists, and he is up there in goals as well. So he is having a fantastic. He's fifth in goals. Sorry. So he's in the top 5 for goals, assists, and points. I mean, that's really good. So he's having a fantastic year. So definitely a guy you want to keep your eye on and see how he continues to do.
Yeah, exactly. And then, we might have these players that eventually will come up into the NHL. Who knows what's going to happen to players like we mentioned earlier with Ryan Callahan, maybe Martel, players like that. You don't know what's going to happen to them. So, I mean, if something, if we trade them or not sign them or whatever, these certain players, then we have these guys that come up into our system, and hopefully the skill level is the same in the NHL. Obviously, it's a bigger league, but I mean, this is always good to have players like this in your system.
No doubt about it. This is our future right here, and it's showing right now that they're playing really well. Now, obviously, this is one season, and of course, you don't know how this is going to translate once they come up into the NHL. But it's not something to just disregard either. Guy 6-7 points in the AHL is very, very good, and it definitely says something.
Yeah, and our AHL team has been competitive there for quite a long time. We mentioned before on how well we draft. So it all comes from that. Having players like Verhaeghe and like Biarbule in our system, and of course we have players like Alexander Volkov and Cal Foote in that team as well. So it's nice to see how well our scouts do in the drafting process and helping out our GM. All right, guys. Well, unfortunately, again, we didn't have any questions. I know that we said that we're going to have something live on YouTube, but it's going to take a little bit, playing around with stuff. We will have a show, hopefully, a live one for playoffs and stuff like that. But until next time, I hope you all have a great week, and we'll catch you all later.